Everybody has an opinion of what good writing is, especially when it comes to popular franchises that appeal to our imagination. We've all had a beloved character who didn't evolve in the direction that we wanted, or a plot that just didn't shake out the way we thought that it should. But that is decidedly not what today's episode is about. No. Today, we're going to be talking conceptually about how stories exist to be in the service of the player's agency, and why gameplay systems exist to validate the world of that story. This is Gameservatory, and I'm Jeremy Ledbetter. So, which game are we going to drag first? Are we going to get on a clickbait train, thinking Cyberpunk, maybe Anthem, or a vintage Heavy Rain? Yes. I'd like to eat that game's liver with a plate of fava beans and a nice Chianti. Stop. What are you going on about? Oh, you don't make a video about bad writing without throwing at least one game under the bus. You know that we don't do that on this channel. Fine. Welcome one and all to Counterbot's 5 rules for highly effective writing in games and other forms of playable entertainment. Whoa, no. Today, we're going to review 5 foundational principles for storytelling in an interactive environment, and we're going to do so through the lens of the critically acclaimed narrative masterpiece, Assassin's Creed Unity. Unity? Oh, oui, it is, perfect. No. Oh, look who's come around, Negative Nancy. Someone start her bus. You know what? That hat isn't even imperial. Oh, that hat's not, it's not what? It's not, you couldn't even get the words out of your mouth? Yeah, okay. Folks, we've got a lot to learn, so let's get started. Oh, and for all of you Brendans and Kimmies out there, we're gonna spoil a lot of shit for this game. Should have played it by now. Alright, rule number 1 of highly effective writing. Fumble your introduction. Nothing pulls in an audience like a confusing, disjointed mess of a beginning. I think what Counterbot is trying to say is that pacing the beginning of an interactive experience means walking a pretty tight rope. How much bandwidth do you spend teaching the player how to play? How much do you spend establishing the story? After all, we only have so much focus to learn new skills and to absorb the premise of the plot. And Unity pulls this off impeccably by not giving us just one beginning, but 4. I don't know how to put this delicately, but Assassin's Creed Unity's introduction is kind of a textbook example of what not to do. To understand why, you've got to be familiar with Assassin's Creed's basic premise. Ugh, I hope this is brief. Relax, it will be. Fundamentally, Assassin's Creed is a story about achieving peace through one of 2 warring ideological factions, the Assassins and their ideals of personal enlightenment versus the Templars and their ideals of collective conformity. We trace this war all the way back through time using an Animus, a virtual simulator that recreates ancestral memories locked away in our very own DNA, and we experience these memories through the perspective of Desmond Miles, the franchise's original main character. There's other factors at play here like ancient mind control devices, the actual creators of the human race known as the Isu, and a whole bunch of revised history ripe for the conspiracy-minded. A critical part of this setup is a clearly defined, conveniently ignorant player character who can ask all the right questions at just the right time so that those of us at home can know what the hell is going on. In what can only be described as narrative sadomasochism, the writers kill off Desmond at the end of Assassin's Creed 3, and ever since, the story has been told at us through the lens of an unknown, unvoiced first-person character who can't, ask about or remark upon anything. Naturally, Unity, fixes this narrative impediment by introducing us, the player, as the main character in its story, and justifies this by casting our gaming platform as an at-home Animus consumer product that's been surreptitiously developed by Templars to spy out our thoughts and to steal our genetic memories. How very meta. Indeed. During your play session, assassins hack your console, and they force you to play through restricted memories to, train you? This is a very gregarious thing for assassins to do, because traditionally, they value the lives of individual people and their well-being. So apparently now, it's an acceptable risk to subject random gamers to forbidden knowledge that, in the Assassin's Creed universe, could get us killed.
Or worse, expelled.
But worse than undermining its own lore, Unity attempts to establish the entire Assassin's Creed premise through a series of brief vignettes that have no clear relationship to each other. In between learning basic play mechanics, we're expected to commit to memory the Templars' public downfall, a sacred book and a magic sword that aren't referenced again until the very end of the game, Arno's childhood memory of his father's murder, and, of course, our personal role in aiding the assassin cause by playing a video game. So which one of these should we pay the most attention to? Well, it doesn't really matter, because these sequences don't effectively recap the plot before Unity, nor do they foreshadow anything particularly alluring about the plot going forward. It's all a rather complicated setup, serving no one in particular. So in summary, what Jeremy's trying to say is that we should be as aimless and as non-specific as we can from the beginning. Quite literally the opposite of everything that you just said. See, the beginning of an interactive experience should be a concise call to action that both equips us and excites us for the challenge ahead, and then unleashes us upon that challenge as quickly as possible. In Unity's case, it's not as if its beginning was done in such a way to prioritize playtime. In fact, most of the introduction is delivered through cutscenes. I'm really glad you brought that up, because it ties directly into rule number 2 of highly effective writing. Wherever possible, highlight the player's lack of agency. I see what you're doing. After sifting through Arno's memories in search of a mystical device called the plot, you're eventually interrupted again, this time to induct you into the Assassin Brotherhood. It's in this moment the designer employs one of my favorite tricks for instant player gratification. I like to call it Dance Monkey Dance. Observe.
Okay, I have a visual. Hey there. This is probably disorienting, so I'll be brief. I'm Bishop, not my real name, obviously, but that's as much as you'll get today. Now that you've experienced life as an assassin, are you willing to pick up the fight and join us? Deacon, load the file. We lifted a media file from Abstergo last month, and the information it contains is astounding. But we won't share these things with just anyone. By pressing play, you'll be joining the assassins. If you want to fight the Templar menace, if you're willing to save civilization from Abstergo's clutches, press play, sit back, and ready yourself for the truth.
Who would think that joining an elite assassin secret society was so easy, right? The real problem with this cutscene, besides its apparent silliness, is the perverse premise that you have any control whatsoever. It's in this moment that we see the antithesis of interactive art. Oh, that's a little overdramatic, don't you think? If playable entertainment excels where other mediums cannot, it's in empowering players to express themselves creatively and strategically through the provided mechanics. By limiting the player to a single, unavoidable button press, Unity's designers have reduced our relationship to this major plot point to a Netflix, "Are you still watching?" prompt. The whole notion of the player at home turned assassin should have never made it out of the writer's room, but this design decision in particular feels especially hollow. What if the player wants to refuse? How would the experience change had they done so? These are questions that a narrative lead should be asking themselves when providing players with such a choice. Okay, it's not great for player agency, but if this is the only time it happens, is it really a big deal? Forcing your audience to interact without giving them the freedom of choice, while saying they have the freedom of choice, should at least say something about the limits of free will, or the immutability of destiny. Something. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out how elementally anti-player this is. And where does that leave other forms of prompted play? Do you not think that QuickTime events are a valid design decision? I think they're a bit cheap, but they're certainly a valid design decision. At least with a QuickTime event, there's a pattern to memorize or a timing to synchronize with, but that is not what this is. There is no pattern to memorize. There is no rhythm to sync with. No. This is an ultimatum. Press a button, or stop playing. Okay, but you're way over-exaggerating this one moment in a 20-something, if not an 80-something hour game. Is it really that big of a deal? Let's take another less obvious example. At the end of Unity, Arno's best friend Elise abandons him under rubble out of her own desperate need to avenge her father. Her choice is impulsive, and it illustrates the self-destructive nature of revenge. She, of course, dies, but her impending doom is presented as conditional. The game transitions out of a cutscene to give us an opportunity to try to save her. And no matter how fast you run or how many bullets you fire, you cannot save Elise. Enabling the player to try implies, at least on some level, that her murder is partially our fault. If only we had gotten there fast enough. Again, the designer doesn't even attempt to legitimize our agency in this moment. None of the myriad gadgets that we've collected can interrupt Germain's killing blow. Maybe they just wanted you to, feel bad, regardless of your effort. Even still, my point stands. If you have to nerf all of the player's abilities, then perhaps your story doesn't belong in an interactive format. But there's not much depth to a story if the protagonist never fails. Are you seriously suggesting that a game's narrative has to contend with the player's ability to succeed at every challenge? With rare exception, absolutely. Keep in mind, the player need not fail for the story to take a downturn. After all, it was Obi-Wan who got lightsabered in the middle of A New Hope, not Luke. And that defeat weighs heavy on our heroes, and it ultimately motivated their victory. The same thing can be applied to an interactive format. And if the narrative needs the player to fail themselves, it's up to the designer to prime us for that, taking as much responsibility off our shoulders as possible. Ideally, imposed failure should be an act of nature, like having the floor cave in, or a lack of means, such as facing an enemy that we can't adequately combat because we're lacking abilities that we'll learn in the future. But even then, this tactic should be applied sparingly and early on as possible. Prolonging a story this way is bound to cause some residual frustration in the player. I mean, getting close to victory, only to have it taken away in a cutscene, is inherently discouraging. And honestly, a good enough reason for most people to stop playing entirely. So, if imposed failure is necessary, it needs to be insightful, or funny, or at least counteracted by a moment of player-driven badassery. Why should we care about the player's fifis anyway? Y'all need to suck it up. The script says that you're a loser, and you're gonna be one, okay? See, this really has nothing to do with coddling the player. Rather, what I'm actually acknowledging is that interactive mediums primarily hinge on the player's performance to be entertaining. Cutscenes are useful for showing us consequences to our actions, a reward for our effort. They can give us a moment to breathe, and they can also give us a new call to action. And for this reason, they are valuable tools, but they're also poor substitutes for the player's in-game capabilities. So if your game has cutscenes, that's bad. In fact, you should stop making games forever, and all the games that have been made with cutscenes in them should be wiped from the face of the planet. Not even close, but we should move on. Yes, we should. There's a beheading over there that I do not want to miss. Rule number 3 of highly effective writing. Make sure the stakes of your side missions are drastically unbalanced to those of the main plot. Making sure optional content is comparatively trivial maximizes poor pacing. After all, we all know there's nothing more important than running errands for strangers while we're actively trying to save the world. Yeah, in this case, Unity's actually pretty good at providing us with side missions that are worth our attention, at least in premise. Arno is frequently tasked with sabotaging Templar efforts, saving assassin allies, solving murders, and intervening in violent altercations between radicals and Parisian citizens. All of this is part and parcel of being an assassin in the Brotherhood. Very rarely does Unity's main plot present us with what we would perceive to be a time-sensitive assignment, so these optional detours don't feel irresponsible in light of our main motivation. Contrary, they actually provide additional color and context to revolutionary Paris. Contrast this with, say, the optional tombs in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, whose plot hinges on Lara Croft trying to save the world from a cataclysm that she accidentally starts. In this context, every time Lara detours into one of these tombs, she appears to be a psychopath who's more interested in artifacts than she is in halting a global disaster that she herself caused. Well, somebody's got to protect that treasure from Armageddon. Think of the treasure, Jeremy. Oh yeah, I don't think they do. What are you saying, that we should just prioritize human lives over material wealth? How dare you? What I'm saying is that Unity actually features quite a bit of relevant optional content. Now, that content's presentation might be kind of simple, but the actual storylines themselves are very fitting for the time period and for Arno's role as an assassin. Cool, so I love this positivity, but can we get back to trashing Unity, please? That is not what we're doing. Isn't it? You seem to be doing a great job so far. Well, I didn't start this. It's not my fault that you keep giving our audience bad advice. Isn't it, though? Well, I don't know who that is, so... Oh well. Okay. I'll try to be serious this time. I swear, this is a real piece of advice, so everybody listen up. Rule number 4 of highly effective writing. Regarding the state of the game world, drastic changes in plot should have no bearing whatsoever. When making momentous changes to the relationship between the player character and their immediate surroundings, it's important that those surroundings remain as static and lifeless as possible. That way, nothing feels impactful or lasting. You know, just like real life. Toward the end of the story, Arno gets exiled from the Assassin Brotherhood. Now, the consequences of this could not be more severe. Imagine just getting kicked out of a secret murder society. Yeah, you'd be a marked person for the rest of your life, and any inclination towards subterfuge would probably get you killed.
Robot's expelled.
As I was saying, after you've been ousted, you can just continue fulfilling assassin contracts. You're allowed to move through their secret hideout or any of the strongholds throughout Paris. The assassins nor their associates ever acknowledge your lack of rank, and there is nary a shadow following you around to make sure that you don't go turncoat for the Templars. In short, the world state is identical both before and after Arno is stripped of his rank. Again, in a medium about consequences, plot points that change our motivation for play need to be adequately reflected in the world that we play in. Undoubtedly, some of you have picked up on what I'm describing, a phenomenon called ludonarrative dissonance. This was coined by Clint Hawking originally. In his blog post, he described it like this. BioShock seems to suffer from a powerful dissonance between what it is about as a game and what it is about as a story. By throwing the narrative and ludic elements of the work into opposition, the game seems to openly mock the player for having believed in the fiction of the game at all. The leveraging of the game's narrative structure against its ludic structure all but destroys the player's ability to feel connected to either, forcing the player to either abandon the game in protest, or simply accept that the game cannot be enjoyed as both a game and a story. Now, Clint describes this in context of BioShock, but the same concept applies to a lot of other titles, including Assassin's Creed Unity. What he refers to as the ludic structure is just the collection of abilities that we're provided to navigate the world and overcome conflict. And this includes the rules that govern the simulated world itself. So, when the story changes in a way that makes moment-to-moment gameplay feel irrelevant or inappropriate, the illusion of coherence falls away, and what we're left with is an obvious gap between the intention of the writer and the intention of the designer. And in this state, we're being signaled that we can't trust our senses, that something or someone is lying.
Very unreliable narrator kind of moment.
Yeah, but unintentionally so. This is just one reason why a video game can feel like it's wasting our time. Kind of like when you're reading a poorly edited book, and you begin to wonder, why am I bothering with this if the author themselves couldn't catch such obvious mistakes? It is, after all, hard to be entertained by somebody seemingly less clever than you. Though I do think that deliberate uses of ludonarrative dissonance could be a really fun dynamic, if it was done the right way.
Illuminating. Well, that's all the time that we have for today, folks. I hope that you found these tips.
Wait. Didn't you say you had 5 rules of highly effective writing?
Huh?
What? You mentioned 5 rules, right?
What do I look like to you? I'm a thought leader, not a math magician.
Okay. Well, I've got one.
Oh, do you now? Well, let's hear your worst.
Rule number 5 of highly effective writing. Downplay your player's efforts to the point of being meaningless.
Oh, yeah. Especially at the end.
Nothing retains a fandom like an ending that goes out of its way to say, hey, the last 15 to 80 hours you spent playing, total waste of time.
Not bad. So tell us, why does Unity knock this rule out of the park?
It's better that I show you, but before I do, keep this in mind. Since our unceremonious induction into the Assassin Brotherhood, we've been tasked with finding the bones of Germain, a powerful human Isu hybrid with special DNA. We uncover his final resting place, and, well, this happens.
My god, I don't believe what I'm seeing. I won this fight 2 centuries before it started. Well done, kid. I don't think Abstergo will bother searching the catacombs for Germain's body. The bones are going to be too damaged, too decayed. We're in the clear at this stage. You did good work, Initiate. Until we contact you again, the best you can do is continue searching Arnold's memories for anything else he might have seen, like rare historical data, more DNA samples, anything to help our cause. We'll be in touch when we need you. Count on it.
So, after a significant amount of time finishing the story, we're told that our efforts are pointless and that we should just keep screwing around in the Animus until the assassins get in touch. Meanwhile, we, a random gamer, have now been made fully aware of who rules the world and that our biological origins are not the product of natural evolution. We've been made a security risk by all parties involved, and a prime candidate for suicide by gunshot to the back of the head. Exposing us to such dangerous information wasn't even for the sake of saving countless lives. It was just to confirm that a speculated pile of bones was indeed unrecoverable. I'm sorry, this is f***ing stupid and completely avoidable. The writer could have had Bishop say anything in this voiceover, and of all things, they had her say, "Well, thanks for your time. This has been super fun, but not super important. Well, I guess I'll talk to you later. Bye."
Ugh. Why does it feel like we just got off an amusement park ride?
I mean, yeah. Look, I don't disparage lightly. Ending a story is difficult, especially in an ongoing franchise. There's a lot to do in the final moments of a major entry like Unity. First, you gotta satisfy the player by wrapping the main character's story in a way that honors their potential for growth, regardless if that character achieved that growth or not. Second, you've gotta set up a possible direction for the narrative going forward. And in doing both of these things, you've gotta champion the player's effort, showing them why it was important to play in the first place. Now, none of this is simple. It's expensive and time-consuming to set up an ending that gives adequate attention to each of these in turn. But, having said that, virtually no story ever has wrapped successfully by being retroactively insignificant. That is a very specific choice for a very specific kind of narrative, and it definitely doesn't work here. I can't tell you how defeated I was finishing this game for the first time with a coda like this. I almost gave up on the franchise entirely.
That's because it's trash!
No, because it's obvious to anybody who's played Assassin's Creed before that Unity's story just fails to capture why the premise is so interesting in the first place. New players don't leave this game meaningfully informed about the mythos established before. Returning players were just left in the same position we were in at the end of Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Unity is this massive undertaking that, unfortunately, amounts to a frivolous holding pattern as far as the whole series' narrative arc is concerned. Now, that said, Unity is a remarkable game. It's beautiful and tonally mature. Running across Parisian rooftops is a total joy, and the black box assassination missions, they had this emergent gameplay that can be truly thrilling. It's unfortunate that Assassin's Creed Unity's center is so rich for its outer structure to be so bitter.
You hungry?
Yeah. Thank you. Really?
See, this was fun. You got to get all dorky and technical, and we both got to thoroughly roast someone else's creative work. Win-win.
Yeah, I don't know, I feel kind of negative about it. I mean, Unity's story overall isn't exceptionally bad. It just so happens to commit several cardinal sins of writing in an interactive format. These are mistakes that any team of writers or designers could make, especially under high-pressure working conditions, you know, the ones that this industry is notorious for. So, I know that I've been snarky and dismissive throughout this video, but I do want to take a moment to recognize the gargantuan effort that it takes to create a title like this. Unity is an achievement, one worth being proud of, and its failures can signal us creators to avoid similar missteps in the future. In using Unity as a point of reference, I want to leave you with a clearer picture of the relationship between storytelling and interactive play, and how they can support each other, and not necessarily with the impression that Unity isn't worth your time. Because it is. It's fun. Go play it.
I, on the other hand, get totally juiced on negativity, so I'm excited to announce our new 50-part video series, critically breaking down Assassin's Creed, line for line, scene for scene, starting with that miserable experience Assassin's Creed 1.
Yeah, we're not doing that.
Well, clearly since my happiness isn't a priority, the only thing I have to live for is your likes on this video. If you would, please.
If you haven't already, consider subscribing, and tell us what you think. If you have your own best practices for interactive narrative, drop them in the comments below. Or if you have a question about anything in the video, you know where to put them. Those comments and questions could very well end up in a future mailbag episode,
And by future, I mean soon. And by soon, I mean the eternity that we continue to live through. Friends, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, happy gaming.
I'd like to eat that game's liver with a plate of fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Not Luke. And that defectory. What is defectory? Can interrupt. Well, none of the gadgets that we've collected during our playtime here can interrupt your mind. See, I can't even get the line out in a stupid voice. Thank you. Okay. I thought you were gonna wait till I opened it. You were like, F you.
You know how hard it is to work with you.